You're not. No one here is even saying no solar and no wind turbines. We're just saying it shouldn't be subsidized. But to the rest of the media, this conversation is that of two radicals who need to be locked away, and that is concerning to me. Very happy now we have a return guest on the program.
Yes,
and it's always interesting when you have people like our next guest, because the video goes up on YouTube, and we don't do a lot of long-form guest interviews.
Yeah, not too often.
Let alone for a second time. And you see this video, it goes up on YouTube. Of course, people who are Mug Club members, they enjoyed it. But the people on YouTube, they're split. And you see a lot of dislikes to likes, and then the ratio just hits a tipping point, and it switches when more people see it, and they actually start looking up what the guest is
actually
discussing.
Looking up the stats that they give.
Exactly, because, you know, this guy, he's a doctor. That means we're all a bunch of schlubs. But you can follow him on the Twitter as long as they allow him at EcoSense now. His book is Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout. Dr. Patrick Moore, thank you for being back, sir.
Great, Stephen. Nice to be with you again.
Well, I'm really glad to have you back, because there were a couple of things I wanted to talk about. And I know that you wrote an article about 12 invisible eco-catastrophes and threats of doom that are actually fake. I'd like to get to those in a second. But last time we had you on, first off, did you get a lot of feedback from your end in your private inboxes, or did you check out the comments section? Do you just avoid it?
No, I generally do look at the comments section, and it was quite a lot of comments. You're right. There was some negatives at first, knee-jerk stuff and trolls. But in the end, it came out very positive, because I am telling the truth. And if anybody can find something that I'm saying that they don't think is true, I would be very pleased to hear from them so I can correct it.
The comments switched because immediately people have a knee-jerk reaction, like you said. They go, "Oh, this person is a climate denier." Hit dislike until they realize, "Oh, hold on a second. One of the founding members of Greenpeace, a doctor, somebody who's actually studied this extensively." And then people started listening to what you had to say. And I wanted to have you on for something specific that I noticed. You know, I spend a lot of time in the Great Lakes region, and you know, they're at record highs right now. I remember Dick Durbin in 2013 saying they were going to dry up. And fast forward a few years, some of them I think are at record highs, and I know others are at 17-year highs. And in contrast, what we talk about with climate change, wherever people line up personally, the region has had some of the best growing climates in decades. Cherries are a very finicky crop. That's one thing that I know, because we have family who work in cherries, and it needs a very moderate, slow thawing winter. And they've actually had to dump cherries to price fix. So right away, I thought of you when we discussed climate change, a warming climate, and more precipitation. Have you been following this? And I always wonder what the response is from the alarmists, regardless of where they line up on climate change, but the alarmism, if we're going, well, hold on a second, the lakes are high and growing is fantastic.
Well, they'll find some reason to say that it's bad that the lakes are overflowing, et cetera. You know, I mean, because now it's become that climate change is too hot, and it's too cold, and it's too wet, and it's too dry. And then they make up that there's more tornadoes and hurricanes, which is false. And then they make up that there's more damage being caused by extreme weather, which is true, because there's so much more infrastructure in the way of extreme weather today because of the population growth and the growth of cities and all. So they'll find a way every time to point to something that they claim is out of the ordinary. And I have challenged these people in a general sense that there is nothing, absolutely zero nothing, in today's weather or climate that is anywhere near out of line with the last 10,000 years in this interglacial period since the ice caps melted the last time. And so they've got to say, okay, no, there's the strongest this and the strongest that, or the weakest this and the weakest that. They can't, because nothing that is happening now is anywhere near out of ordinary with the ordinary.
Well, that brings
there's extremes in every measure. You'll always find an extreme somewhere in the world going on, and that's all they do is cherry pick them now. And it's really disingenuous of them, because they started saying it's global warming and carbon dioxide is doing it. It was very simple what they said at the beginning.
Sure.
More CO2 from human fossil fuel consumption will increase the warming of the Earth. Then they changed it to climate change, which now wasn't just warming. It was also cold and dry and wet, and every other imaginable flooding and whatever all of a sudden was attributable to carbon dioxide. Even cold was attributable to carbon dioxide, even though the idea of CO2 being a greenhouse gas is the idea that it would make it warmer,
Right.
not that it would make it colder. And then when the temperature stopped increasing at the rate it did during the 1990s,
Which
was
we both acknowledge. It was increasing during
Yes.
the 1990s. Yes, there you go. So just for people out there, not a denier, he's actually analyzing the data. We both agree on that. Good.
But this 1990s warming, beginning in actually the 80s, followed the cooling from the 1940s to the 1970s, in which if you go to the deplorable climate science blog of Tony Hellers, you will see just yesterday, on the 10th of this month, he documented what they were saying then and what we're saying now. And then a new ice age may be coming, because it was cooling in the 60s and 70s.
Yes.
Then it started warming again, and around 2000, the warming slowed down to a basically insignificant level.
Yes. Well, I believe we've. I don't want to cut you off, but I believe we've covered this quite a bit in the first interview, and it was very interesting. And of course, there's still backlash no matter what. My point of interest here is with the Great Lakes. It's moderate, temperate climates, not super cold and not super hot in the summers. Slow thawing and record crop yields to the point where we're dumping cherries out because we want to fix the prices. To me, it is mind-boggling. But this does bring us to a bigger point, which you wrote about in your article. What do you think of the new trend? You know what? Maybe I'm ignorant. Maybe it's not a new trend, but it seems as though science right now is bowing to activism quite a bit, and that's kind of what you're speaking about, where science is often used to silence whatever contradicts its initial hypothesis. And a good example of this is right now, if people are watching this on YouTube, I don't know if you're aware of this, YouTube now puts fact-check links on all videos about people who might be climate change skeptics, as they put them, in order to debunk them. So right now it could be appearing. I have no idea at what point in this video. What do you think about science bowing to political pressure? Is that a real problem?
Yes, it is a real problem. Like when Galileo was put under house arrest for his life for saying that the Earth went around the sun. And the same thing is happening now. People are claiming that CO2 is the main driver of climate change, global warming, and now it isn't even climate change, it's extreme weather events. They used to say, oh, that's not climate, that's just the weather, when you said, oh, it was really cold, or read something, that sort of contradicted
Right.
the global warming scenario. And now all they do is talk about extreme weather, when they were telling us not to confuse weather with climate.
Yes.
About 10 years ago.
It was used to actually make people make anybody look like a simpleton. They'd go, "Oh, you're confusing climate and weather," and of course that ruined Thanksgiving dinner. Have you heard, by the way, a good example, the hoax academic paper? It claimed that penises cause climate change. Were you up on this?
I did hear about that, and I looked down and could not see any causal relationship at all.
Well, yes, it's more of a climate detector. It's a veritable climate stick, I guess, for using them interchangeably. But it's pretty funny. They just used a bunch of climate jargon to associate penises with worsening climate change. But the funny part, I don't think a lot of people know about this, it actually was published in a peer-reviewed academic journal. They were tricked. That to me that really is Orwellian type scary as a non-scientist.
Well, at my age, actually, Stephen, any cause-effect relationship related to that part of my anatomy would be welcome.
Well, I'll tell you, there'll be a different doctor who I'll have on a private Skype after this. But how does that happen? How does something like as someone who's been in this industry for a long time, and obviously the work that you've done as a doctor, how does something like this get published? We always talk about peer-reviewed papers published in a peer-reviewed journal. How does something that was fraudulent by design make it through? What's the process like? How are they screening?
It's completely corrupted in that almost all the peer review is being done by people's buddies who are on the same wavelength as they are. And actually, most of the peer-reviewed journals have been taken over by journalists. Used to be peer-reviewed science journalists were run by scientists who had a flair for publishing and for the language and, could read and write. But these people in charge of the science journals now are leftist journalists to a large extent. And they just have a barrier against anything that questions the litany or the truth squad, and as they call themselves, but they're not the truth squad. They're the don't let the truth out squad. This has been, I'm on the west coast of British Columbia here. This has been one of the biggest wild berry years I have seen. It is actually the biggest one I've ever seen. Blackberries, which are gone wild here, they're not native to here. Huckleberries, salmon berries, salal berries, those are all native here. I've never seen anything like it. And it isn't just the warmth. As a matter of fact, I think the warming is a minor component of the record crop productions that are going on in grains and all kinds of other commodities around the world. It's the increase in carbon dioxide, which is fertilizing all of the green plants around the world and making them grow faster and yield more. That's the biggest part of it. And it's been more or less proven with satellites from about 6 different research groups around the world, in Europe, in Australia, in the United States. And as a matter of fact, there's a bit of a disconnect in NASA and NOAA, because there are people in both those organizations who are looking at the fertilization effect of CO2 on the greening of the Earth, as it's called. The Earth's
Now, would that be,
forests
a quick question
are
from a simpleton, would that be directly just because of CO2's chemical structure? Or are you talking about it leading to more precipitation, which would help, obviously, with the soil?
No, I'm talking about it as a food for plants. CO2 is the primary food for plants.
Right.
Water is also, like carbon dioxide and water put together make sugar, glucose. That's the basis of the energy for all life on Earth, because we eat the plants, or we eat animals that have eaten the plants. It all comes up from photosynthesis and the combination of carbon dioxide and water to make sugar. And this is where the demonization of carbon dioxide is so outrageously off base, because carbon dioxide is the basis of all organic life on Earth. That is where the carbon comes from in carbon-based life. And we are carbon-based life, and so is all the rest of the life on Earth. And if there wasn't any CO2 in the global atmosphere, there would be no life. Not only if there wasn't any, if there wasn't a certain amount. Because just like anything, there can be too little of it.
That's my pivotal question here, because I can hear skeptics right now saying, well, hold on a second, we're not saying all carbon dioxide is bad. We're saying that we are out of balance now, that the ratio is too high of carbon dioxide. So what is the amount that would be optimal, I guess, and how close or how far away are we from it? Because I know that that's where a lot of the nuanced debate occurs, and they just claim that obviously non-scientists, as myself, are not entitled to an opinion, so I'll listen to yours.
Well, one of the most concrete ways in which you can see what the optimum level for plant growth is both experimentation in labs and greenhouse growers. All greenhouse growers around the world increase the CO2 level in their greenhouse to increase the productivity up to 40 to 60% of the crops in there, and to make them grow faster, to come to fruition sooner, shorter time of growth, in other words. And that's around 800 to 2,000 parts per million. Now, greenhouse growers don't put 2,000 ppm in because there's a law of diminishing returns. At first, you get really great increases from 400 to 800, and even from 800 to 1,000 or 1,200. After that, the curve starts to go off, but it still goes up.
Okay.
So in nature, where they're not worried about profits and diminishing returns, in nature, the optimum level is somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 parts per million, whereas now it's 400, and before we came along, it was 280, and at the height of the last glaciation, because the seas, when they cool, absorb CO2 from the atmosphere, it was at 180 parts per million, which is only 30 parts per million above where plants begin to die, at 150 ppm. And during the last glaciation, the high elevation plants did die. That is pretty well demonstrated. And the reason they died is because the higher you go, the thinner the air becomes. And so 150 parts per million is occupying a much larger volume at elevation, and therefore the plants can't get enough CO2 to survive. So talk about not being in balance. CO2 has been declining for 150 million years on a relatively steady basis.
Right.
The graphs are all available for anybody to see, and it's very well proven through ice cores and oxygen-18 proxies in ocean sediments, and et cetera,
Stonehenge.
that CO2 has been declining steadily, actually, for the last 500 million years. But let's just take the last 150 million, where it has been steadily declining without any upward blips. There was a huge flux of CO2 into the atmosphere in the early Earth. Then when species learned to do photosynthesis and use that carbon dioxide to make sugars, they started taking it out of the atmosphere. But it wasn't until about 40 or 50 million years ago that it started to go into a danger zone. And it just keeps going down and down and down until we came along, whereas the marine calcifying organisms inadvertently, by building an armor plating for themselves, a very useful thing to do for their survival, presaged the end of life on Earth through the loss of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere.
But screw them. Al Gore has another Learjet to get to. I understand exactly where you're going with this, but here's kind of the issue that we run into, right? Is what you're saying. Obviously, we'll have overlays for people. People can look up for themselves and obviously decide whether they believe it to be legitimate or not. There's something that is legitimate. There's truth, and then you can choose to believe truth. Unfortunately, but the issue is that everything you're saying doesn't break through, and so many, even YouTube, like we just talked about themselves, will dismiss you simply as a quack, as a denier, without listening to what you have to say. So I want to go back to something that you just mentioned, which to me is obviously of the utmost importance, because it ties into a lot of the cultural issues that we've discussed, cultural Marxism, the censorship of speech. We see it in comedy now, but it really concerns me when you start to see it in science. You mentioned that a lot of these peer-reviewed journals were once peer-reviewed by scientists and now often by activist journalists. Do you have any examples?
Activist scientists.
Or activist scientists, yes.
The journalists control the journals,
yes,
largely these days. The activists control the science, so-called.
Right.
When they say climate science, right, or climate scientists, they mean themselves.
Yes.
They don't mean everybody who's studying the climate, because people who are studying the climate who don't agree with them are considered deniers, not climate scientists.
Exactly. I'm talking about the peer-reviewed journals like we were discussing, and you said there's been a shift there. When did that shift occur? Because for a long time, again, Americans had to rely on certain systems and power that they believed to be truthful. When would you say that shift occurred, and do you have any, I guess, particular egregious examples that we could maybe...
Beginning 30 years ago, 20 years ago, it was over by, 20 years ago pretty well. And that's what we've been being fed since, is basically a very filtered set of ideas. The idea that CO2 is the main driver of climate change and global warming is the centerpiece.
Right.
And that is false. There is no possibility that any substance in that small a quantity, 0.04% of the atmosphere, could be the controlling factor of the whole global climate. The sun is the controlling factor of the whole global climate, but it is moderated by many other factors.
And quick question, you said 0.4%. How much of that is
0.04%?
0.04%. How much of that is man-made?
Well, that's a question of whether you're looking at it as how much of the CO2 in the atmosphere today was caused by humans versus how much of the CO2 in the flux is caused by humans.
Right.
It's sort of like in economics, you have a cash flow statement and you have a balance sheet. Right. On the balance sheet, right now, CO2 has gone from 280 parts per million to 400 parts per million, about a 40% increase since humans started emitting significant amounts of CO2, mostly since 1950. Right. There's been an exponential curve of emissions, but there hasn't really been an exponential curve of CO2 levels in the atmosphere. That's a fairly straight line. And that indicates that much of the CO2 we are emitting is being absorbed by the vegetation of the earth, because that's what eats CO2.
That's what I wanted to get to, because that to me is, I think this is kind of a bait and switch that occurs with a lot of people. Again, being someone who's not a scientist, but who's read as best I can, there have been drastic increases, certainly in human emissions. But like you said, I think it's very interesting if people look it up and see that, as you've discussed, the overall levels of CO2 in the Earth's climate do not necessarily correlate. They've been pretty consistent, and that to me was one of the most remarkable findings during my research into this issue. And I just highly encourage that everyone else out there go and do that research. Let me ask you, I want to go back to the journalism issue, because again, this is very important. It doesn't matter. We can scream until we're blue in the face about the truth if no one is there to hear it, if we get shut down. And that's why the deplatforming is so dangerous. Why do you think it is? Why did this happen? Now this will definitely be demonetized. Why did this happen with peer-reviewed journals? I mean, a good example, we kind of see it right now with the BDSM, or Brown just removed a study on rapid onset gender dysphoria, for example. They removed an actual study, we're talking about clinical studies, medical observations. We kind of see what's happening there, for example, on the gender science due to political correctness. But why do you think this occurred starting 30 years ago, according to your kind of your approximation? Why? What is the why here behind this and this transition so recently?
Well, the real problem is there are 5 powerful elites in our society who benefit from this myth.
Okay.
The myth that carbon dioxide, And it depends on, it's 5 or 6, depending on whether you think the media and Hollywood are 2 separate elites or whether they are one elite.
Right.
But starting at the top with the green movement itself, the fundraising around this issue has been hundreds of billions of dollars over the years. Then you come to the politicians who benefit from the idea that they can save the citizens from this catastrophe, right? The catastrophe is made up by the green movement and the media basically being an echo chamber for it. The media needs sensationalism, especially the print media these days, but all media is giving in to internet these days. So the big media, mainstream media, is all under threat. Right. Because of digital media, internet media, social media, all that stuff.
A perfect example that for people, by the way, doubting, just to back up what you're saying here, cherries are a good example, because only a few years ago in northern Michigan, I experienced this personally, remember, the trees thawed, right? There was a thaw, and then it froze again later. It was a later winter freezing, and so it was horrible for the cherry crop, and it was all over the news. Record high cherry yields to the point that they're dumping cherries, not a peep. You have to do a lot of research to find that out, because it doesn't sell papers as much as cherries might be gone due to climate change. We actually read those articles if you go and read local Michigan publications. So I just wanted to drive that one home, because I'm sure a lot of people can think of specific instances in their life.
So we've got the green movement, the media, and the politicians who can promise to save people from certain doom. Right. And their children and their grandchildren, of course.
Paris Accord.
And then there's the green businesses, Elon Musk, right? Tesla and all of that.
People are not going to like this, but continue.
I can already hear the comments.
The wind and solar, short Tesla right now, because he's done, as far as I'm concerned. And same with wind and solar. The vast quantities of money and tax credits and subsidies and guaranteed profits that have gone into these to prop them up, it would never have happened otherwise in any world there is. It's completely stupid what's been done. If people want clean energy, they should go nuclear and hydroelectric where it is available.
Right.
But and gas, clean gas, and now clean coal, because they have learned with scrubbers and precipitators and all of these technologies to make the exhaust coming out from a coal plant very clean from a pollution point of view. But they call CO2 a pollutant, when in fact it is the main food for all life on Earth. We need to separate those two things. How about separating poison from primary nutrient of all life on Earth? That would be a logical separation as far as I'm concerned. And then
it seems logical when you put it that way, yes.
Yeah. Then comes the scientists, virtually all of whom in the climate scientist category, as they're self-described clique of climate scientists, are almost all, I would almost say 100%, close to 100% on taxpayer money. This $100 billion climate fund that, the first guy to line up for it after the Paris Agreement was Mugabe from Zimbabwe, right? And he claimed that climate change had destroyed the agricultural industry in Zimbabwe. It might have had something to do with him kicking out all the people who actually knew how to farm.
It could be related. Yeah, there could be some correlation there. I'll give you that.
But in the case of the Paris Agreement, it's just a goody two-shoes document. Yeah. It has nothing to do with anything that is actually going to happen. Because
and that's assuming, by the way, that's assuming that you believe carbon dioxide to be poison. And that's assuming, by the way, that you believe if everyone followed the rules that it would somehow fix this problem of climate change. If you assume those things, then you can look at this bill, of course, which would cost countries billions upon billions of dollars, not to mention the millions of lives in third world countries. And you also have to go along the logic trail assuming that China is going to play ball. Yeah, we'll get right on that. That's their top priority right now.
No, well, they were actually specifically exempted along with India right from the beginning. Right. Obama went over to China and negotiated a historic climate deal with the Chinese that they wouldn't have to do anything until 2030, which might as well be infinity.
Why?
Well, because they wanted them to vote for it.
But why should they get to vote? And they're completely exempt. I understand that's why we wanted them to vote for it.
They had to vote because they were one of the countries in the world.
Yes, I know they're one of the countries in the world, but they're going to pull themselves out of this agreement. To me, it's like having a current felon who is in prison voting on the laws of felonies. It is unreal to me. And the reason I'm saying this, yes, does it sound absurd? I'm trying to make the point that people need to understand we needed the vote of a country who had no plan in taking part in the law to begin with. That is nonsensical to me, even if you believe everything else leading up to that point. And I think most people don't even know this.
There is no evidence that any country, I mean any, not one country, has made an effort to live up to the Paris Agreement. Right. None. They're all just going about their business as usual. The United States, in fact, has reduced its CO2 emissions since the year 2000 more than any other country in the world. Yeah. Without any Paris Accord or Kyoto Protocol. And that's largely because of the conversion from coal to gas due to the fracking industry. And the Greens are against fracking, along with nuclear energy, which has no CO2 emissions, and hydroelectric energy. Apparently, they don't like lakes. There are too many lakes.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
That leads to, obviously, there are issues with dams. That leads to Tom Selleck stealing water for his avocados. I grew up in Quebec. We'd say we pay our hydro bill. That for people who don't know, hydro was our electric bill. So when we first would move there, people said, oh, you're paying your water bill? No, hydroelectric. We even had a problem with it. And you have socialists and socialist separatists in Quebec. There are no far right-wing conspiracy theorists. They don't exist. And I do think it's important what you're talking about, what I have heard from you. And then I want to get to your article and just a couple of top examples of these sort of doomsday threats that we've been hearing from the media for a long time. I thought some of them were hysterical, the ones that you debunked. But what I'm hearing from you is, first off, a very balanced worldview and approach. You acknowledge the warming. You acknowledge that human emissions have increased. But then a disagreement on whether it is poison or actually as we're talking about carbon dioxide, life-giving for plants in a lot of ways. And then I hear a very multi-pronged approach. And this is something I think people need to understand. To be a climate change denier or skeptic, to be labeled that, just means that you have to disagree with any of these points. For example, even if we agreed with everything else, even if I disagreed with you on the carbon dioxide, and I just said, you know what, though? I don't think that the Paris Agreement is going to work out. Bing, be labeled a climate change denier. And you are also talking about a very multi-pronged approach. No one here is saying only hydro. I'm not. You're not. No one here is saying only nuclear. I'm not. You're not. No one here is saying only fracking. I'm not. You're not. No one here is saying only clean coal. I'm not. You're not. No one here is even saying no solar and no wind turbines. We're just saying it shouldn't be subsidized. But to the rest of the media, this conversation is that of two radicals who need to be locked away, and that is concerning to me.
Yeah, it should be, because unless you believe every single word of what they're saying, they can call you a denier. Right. And that means it's more like Nazi, it's more like Stalin, it's more like the dictatorships that have destroyed countries like Venezuela. It's wrong to destroy freedom of thought and freedom of speech, and they're doing this in the name of I don't know. They make it out as if they're the ones that are in favor of freedom of speech almost, and yeah, they're not the racists, you know. Right. Of course not, except they don't like white people. It's so weird. It's so weird. And when anyone ever says anything about someone and they're saying it's because of their race, I'm just going like, what the hell are you talking about? You can't say that everybody of that race is this way or that way. Right. You know, there's smart people in every race. There's stupid people in every race. There's short people and tall people in every race. And
And by the way, that's another issue. We were just talking about this with Sheriff Clark the other day that's been politicized by science. For example, we know, I mean, listen, we talk about the difference between races. There's a reason. Look at the top 10 land speed records from anything on 2 feet. There's not a white person there. There are no Greek names in there. Just look at the world's strongest men. They all come from Iceland. It's a place with 300,000 people. Obviously, there's a difference in lineages. Obviously, people have certain proclivities to being, and usually there's a life budget where you're better in one area, and then somebody else has got you checkmated in another one. Okay, but I do want to.
Not sex, though. Not sex.
No, not well. Sex is a figment of your imagination. It's all about gender now. Yeah, gosh, you just want to ensure that this gets banned and demonetized. So you wrote this article at whatsupwiththat.com, 12 invisible eco-catastrophes and threats of doom that are actually fake. If you could just, for people who haven't read it, I highly recommend they go read it. We'll have it linked in the description. What are some of the prime examples that you think people, where people might have some misconstrued ideas?
They're all actually pretty prime. The basis of this, though, is that invisible and remote threats.
Right.
And what it means is that these 12 ones, and there's more of them, are all about things that nobody can verify for themselves by observation because they are either invisible or way far away. And the first one in there is the coral reefs are dying, right? Coral reefs are way far away from nearly everybody, and they are under the water where no one can actually verify what's happening. So when it was broadcast far and wide in 2016 that 93% of the Great Barrier Reef was dead or dying or about to die soon, that went viral around the world. The actual statistic that was based on was that 93% of the reefs in the northern, hottest region, compared to the central and southern, so there's 3 regions, 93% of the reefs in the northern region had some bleaching.
Yes.
That could mean 1% of the 93% of the reefs.
Could mean they're big Slim Shady fans.
And the fact is, bleaching is not death. Bleaching is just a stage that coral goes through when it ejects its symbionts, its phytoplankton, which makes it what color it is, and it turns white because the organisms that live in the coral are, in fact, clear, like a jellyfish. They are related to jellyfish. They're the same basic family.
Okay.
And so this goes around the world. Then when it turns out very clearly 2 years later that all these reefs are recovering and they never were dead in the first place, no news goes with that.
Just like the dumping of the cherries. We hear about the frozen cherries. We don't hear about all the delicious ones that you're dumping in a pot because we have to price fix.
Another one that I love because it's current is the sea of plastic. Right.
Yeah, okay, this is one that I just had someone in the office telling me the other day, talking about the sea of out in the middle of the ocean, the size of Texas, right?
The size of Texas, yes. You couldn't film that from an aircraft at 80,000 feet. It's so big.
Right. You
would have to go in a geosynchronous satellite 30,000 miles above the Earth to get something as big as Texas in the lens, practically.
Yeah. Right.
And what first thing I say is, have you seen a picture of this on the internet anywhere, this sea of plastic the size of Texas? No, it's all graphics.
Right.
There's no pictures of it. There's a picture of a bird, a dead bird cut open, where they have placed plastic objects in it so that it's more than a stomach could hold, right? It's totally fake, and it's all over the internet that this bird ate all this plastic and died. Right?
Right.
The reason fish and birds eat pieces of plastic is not because of the plastic. It's because of the food that is growing on the plastic, just like a piece of wood would have barnacles and crabs and stuff growing on it. That's why they eat it. And what species would swallow something bigger than it could poop out? Right? If we could swallow something bigger than we could poop out, we'd all be dead because
my dog did that once. He swallowed an entire ear of corn, whole.
Yeah.
And then the next day went, right on the table. So I wouldn't put it past some species. But that is, now, what again, devil's advocate here, what if, would people argue, well, hold on, it's not that it's actually one big...
There is no sea of plastic.
But if you added up the totality of plastic, would it make up the size of, the state of Texas or Roseanne's loft apartment?
Not if it was all crunched together. No, it wouldn't. And there's this island in the Pitcairn group that they say has the most plastic of any island in the Pacific, in the world, right?
So was it like Connecticut size?
You can't even fly to it. It hasn't got an airport. It's uninhabited. So I went on Google Earth, and you can actually go right down to see all the beaches around. And you cannot see anything there. right? It's right on Google Earth. I'm redoing my main presentation to reflect these 12 fake catastrophes.
So it's more like a Rhode Island's sized sea of plastic, is what you're telling me.
There's lots of places where plastic is coming out rivers and clogging up estuaries, especially in Asia.
Yeah.
For some reason, they have a penchant for throwing plastic in the river.
Yeah,
I don't know. And in Eastern Europe, the communities of gypsies throw all their garbage out the back door, and it ends up in the streams and lakes. And it's a problem. But really, it's mostly a problem of litter.
Yes.
Plastic is no more toxic than wood, right? It's not toxic. Your credit cards are made of plastic. Vinyl records are made of plastic. You probably got plastic things sitting on your desk in front of you.
Well,
there.
the argument they would say is that it's unnatural. That wood was kind of a natural cycle of nature. That it would make its way out into the open water, whereas plastic is new because of humans. So they would say because it's unnatural, that it comes with problems.
Except wood is also a plastic. The lignin in wood is a plastic. Cellulose was nature's first plastic. It's a polymer of glucose molecules.
Yeah.
So
also very difficult to digest, by the way. I found that out from my nutritionist, that cellulose, he was like, well, actually, a lot of raw vegetables aren't really all that good for you because cellulose can be pretty tough on the digestive tract. And I learned that one the hard way. But yes, okay, so there's no sea of plastic.
Fiber, though. They say fiber is good for your digestive system, even though you can't digest it. But best to put it through a cow first, because they can digest it. Actually, the cows aren't digesting it. It's bacteria in their gut that are digesting it. And the bacteria in their gut have fungi inside them that produce the actual enzyme that is able to split the glucose molecules from a cellulose.
Doctor, I love you, but you're getting too nerdy. Okay, let's go to the next catastrophe here.
Don't eat wood.
Yeah, don't eat wood. Okay, this is one, obviously, we've talked about this. Polar bears. That's one that Philim and McAleer and Ann McElhenney have talked about for a long time. I mean, okay, can they give us that one along with the Great Lakes record highs? Can they give us the polar bears and say they were wrong about that?
No, they cannot. Even though they admit that the polar bear population has increased substantially, they question the number from 1970 at being 6,000. So they say, oh, no, it couldn't have been that low back then. Actually, it was, because there was unrestricted hunting on polar bears until 1972, when the United States and all the other circumpolar countries signed a treaty restricting hunting on polar bears. Since then, they have increased to 25 to 30,000 from whatever it was back then. But it's a big increase, and virtually all the populations are stable or growing. But
that's a nightmare.
Why don't you just go look for yourself? Just go up and count the polar bears around the Arctic Circle. It's nothing to it. Right? That's the problem. That's the problem with these 12 invisible and threats of doom. They're either invisible, like carbon dioxide. That counts for about 5 of them. Ocean acidification, all this climate stuff, increased storms is all caused by this minute invisible gas in the atmosphere. Oh, yes, right. And we believe in witchcraft, too. So.
Well, people don't know, after this, me and Dr. Patrick Moore, we're going to have a good leeching with each other. We're going to be doing a lot of leeching. So,
The polar bears, no one can go and verify it for themselves, how many there are. They have to listen to scientists, sometimes activist scientists, on public money. They have to listen to activists, politicians. They have to listen to green activists, all of whom are in a cabal trying to make the population has increased. It will sure crash into oblivion any day now. Right? It's all about predictions for these people. Yeah. And Al Gore predicted there'd be no ice in the summer in the Arctic way before now, in 2007.
I know. It's remarkable to me.
Over 10 years
Again, Dick Durbin with the Great Lakes drying up. I was looking at the Lake Michigan coastline going, okay, this is one that people can verify for themselves. Look, that used to be beach. We don't have beach there anymore. Can you give us this one? But polar bears I hate. I'd be fine if they went extinct. I know you're not supposed to say that, but they're one of the only species who actually hunt humans for fun. In the face, with availability, readily available, actually. Other food sources, they will eat humans. I don't like them. And paper straws suck. I think this is emblematic, and then we can leave on this, and I will get your thoughts. The plastic straw controversy. Okay. Obviously, this isn't as serious as people dying in third world countries due to energy concerns with modern climate activism. But the plastic straw debacle, here's what is so amazing to me. When someone first sat down and pitched the idea of a paper straw, right, before this was foisted on the American public, You would think there'd be a conversation of, well, hold on a second, how do we improve this? Because, right, everyone here, think right now. Think of a paper straw. You would think it's soggy, it sucks, everything you drink through this straw, your cocktail tastes like a number 2 pencil. You would think all of these things, and you would think that the people who thrust this idea forward of paper straws instead of plastic would have solved them. No, it's exactly what you think. It's like they don't care how inconvenient and terrible it is for humans. That's why I hate the paper straw controversy, because they suck. Your thoughts?
Well, the real issue is, what on earth harm is the plastic straw causing? They make fake pictures of marine animals with straws sticking out of their eyes. As you know, I mean, it's completely phony. Straws are not dangerous. What's dangerous is castaway fish nets. It's not because they're made of plastic. It's because of the shape they're in.
Right.
It's because of their configuration. You could make a net out of organic material and put it out in the ocean, and it would catch things too.
Yeah.
So what we have to do is teach fishermen not to discard their worn-out nets and to come sell them to somebody on the beach, because people don't mind if they got a few holes in them, and put them over their thatched roof and stuff like that. There's a big market in used fish nets, in fact.
Right.
So people should learn. I mean, there's lots of education required around our interaction with the environment, but we have to differentiate between litter and pollution. Pollution is toxic. Pollution causes harm. Litter by the side of the road, a pop bottle by the side of the road, is not going to cause harm. My Greenpeace buddies back in the day used to be aghast when I would throw tin cans and glass bottles overboard out in the middle of the Pacific, because I knew they would become a habitat for some creature on the bottom, right? And they're not going to harm anything, right?
Somewhere right now, there's a hermit crab wearing your old Dr. Pepper bottle. I think that's a perfect. No, but listen, none of us we don't want more litter, and obviously that hurts your property values. Of course, that's my primary concern here. But yeah, I think we want to be good stewards of what we've been endowed with, what we have. Obviously, you don't want to be careless with the environment or with littering when it's needless. But I really appreciate you coming on the show and educating us. Hope for those who have ears to hear. At EcoSense now on Twitter. The book is Confessions of a Greenpeace Dropout, and it's available paperback or ebook on Amazon, right, Dr. Patrick Moore?
Yes, it is. And my website is ecosense.me.
ecosense.me, and that article we'll have in the description is at whatsupwiththat.com. Very entertaining, very educational, well worth the read. Doctor, thank you so much for being on. We'll have to have you back again. Hey, if you like this video, subscribe, hit the notification bell, or if you want to continue to enjoy free content, support us at louderwithcrowder.com/mugclub, where you get the full nightly show. An hour every day free, along with all of our friends' content. If not, you don't want to do any of those things, you're probably just here.